Well, I was privileged enough to see Robert's work years ago when he was editing, piling through 20-some years of Kodachrome slides into what became the New Yorker's book. And again, I was lucky enough to write a foreword for that book. So I think, obviously, for me, it makes obvious sense to start there, and then lead into the new book. Do you want to just say anything about that work?
Well, actually, Sean said to me when I showed him the work, he said, "You should make a book out of it," and that really meant a lot at the time. And you know, the New Yorker's book was 30 years ago when I made the pictures in 81, 82, and it took me a long time to get it together. But it was shot on Kodachrome, and you know, I just loved that film for the color saturation and the contrast. And when I was making the iPhone book, I was looking for something that kind of echoed that kind of color palette. And Hipstamatic provided a way to do that back in 2009, before Instagram. And it allowed me to make something that made me happy.
So the phone book images were made between
2009 and 15.
And the other work was late 70s through the 80s for the most part. I'm wondering if you would say something about, I'm assuming people maybe have seen the New Yorker book, but since the phone book is so new, maybe they haven't. Well, I guess they're seeing some maybe for the first time if they haven't seen it already. But I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about the difference in the way they look, the pictures look, or how the difference and the similarities.
Okay. Well, you know, Kodachrome was film, and it was all made before digital. And if you like the look of Kodachrome, that's what you got. Your job was to expose the film correctly, because being a stop and a half off in either direction, you wouldn't have an image anymore. And, you know, when digital came in, I was shooting with a DSLR, and I just got kind of tired of shooting with a big camera up to my face and shooting rectangles. And the iPhone came along, and okay, now I can shoot squares. And the way Hipstamatic works is you can pick a film that is a reference towards an analog equivalent and a lens that's an analog equivalent, and you put them together, you get a look for the images. And pretty quickly I found a combination that really reminded me of Kodachrome with saturated colors and pretty high contrast, and that's when I started doing it.
I'm going to bore down even more into the format and your approach to picture making and the format. To me, the pictures in New Yorkers are. They're rectangle because it was 35 millimeter, but they seem a little looser, a little more. What I would say is, to me, having looked at both books, the newer work actually seems a little more formal. Would you say it's the square that does that?
I think it is the square. The square is actually a tougher format to compose for, because so many things can go wrong with it.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons why I like using the square, because it was a challenge for me.
But would you say that the phone book pictures are actually more composed than the other ones?
Yeah, I think so, because when I was actually doing them, I was started with an iPhone 4S, and it was actually really slow. I mean, I know this sounds ridiculous, but you would take a picture and you'd have to wait for the phone to process the image and store it.
I remember that particularly with the Hipstamatic app. I mean, the camera actually was kind of slow, but with the Hipstamatic app, it was particularly
Yeah.
slow. Like you would take it and you would have to wait.
Sorry, but
You would have to wait for it to process.
I'll leave it. It's okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So in a way, that's what I liked about it. It reminded me of shooting film, where you had to slow down. When you're shooting film, you're actually spending money every time you made a picture, and then you'd have to wait a week to get it back from Kodak with a little yellow box. And I guess shooting with a motor drive in a DSLR just seemed like you were taking everything for granted and just hoping you might get a good picture.
Right.
And using Hipstamatic and a slow camera was actually really a joy in a way. It forced me to look at things the old-fashioned way without a zoom lens and just make photos.
So now I have two questions. That leads me to two questions. The first is with the 35 millimeter camera, you usually bring it up to your eye.
Exactly.
And or sometimes people, you shoot up from the hip or whatever. But with your phone and without any kind of zoom or anything like that, I think for me, taking a picture with your phone becomes a much more physical thing.
Absolutely.
So I wonder if you could talk about that. Like, to change your angle, you literally might have to bend down.
And that's the point. It's like going back to the old days when you shot film with a prime lens, like a 50, and an iPhone's lens is like somewhere between a 28 and a 35. And if you wanted to change the photo, you had to move your body like it was 1945 or something, 1950. And to me, that was a way of slowing myself down and really looking at what I'm looking at.
It's kind of, to me, that's kind of funny because you go from a real piece of equipment to something you just kind of carry around, and you end up working more like you're using a kind of large format kind of camera or something like that.
And I wasn't even holding it up like this. I'm holding it down here and kind of learning how to look at it like this. And I got used to it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why it's more formal, because I guess I just was really careful about the way I would frame things. And I think it really does change the way you make a picture when you're not covering your own face with technology. And
and then you mentioned there that and even in the later pictures you were using the Hipstamatic app.
Yeah, I used the Hipstamatic for the whole book.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there are different films and things like that. So would you I don't know how techy everybody is here, but I'm interested in how much you
Well, basically what I did was, Hipstamatic over the years has created like 50 different, and this is all in quotation marks, lenses and films, and the films reference like old Polaroids or Kodachrome or Japanese roll film, and each one of them has a different look. And pretty early on, after trying like 10 or 11 different combinations, I found one that basically gave me a really clean image without a lot of
because they can look really processed.
Yeah, it can look really processed, and people will look at these pictures, they'll still think that they're processed a little bit, but I was looking for something that was really clean, sharp, and popped the colors and made them warmer. And once I found that combination, I don't know why, I just said, this is what I want, I'm going to keep using it. And at the beginning there was a lot of controversy about whether you're really making photographs with this thing. Damon Winter did a thing on Afghanistan soldiers that he shot with an iPhone, and the pictures were wonderful, but a lot of people gave him a lot of shit about it.
Yeah, but there's like people like Ben Lowy and have taken it,
Sure, but that's like 3 years after that.
Yeah.
I mean, Damon Winter was the first guy who gets Hipstamatic published in the New York Times on the front page, and he wrote an essay about it, defending the choices he was making. And I really related to that. It was great to hear it,
To go back to color a little bit, I would say, people who know Kodachrome tend to think of that as like one of the most saturated colors.
Exactly.
But actually, I would in looking at the photo book, it's actually more. I was kind of surprised that it feels like color is even more important to that work than it was to the New Yorker's, which was made with Kodachrome.
Yeah, I mean, every photograph is somewhat of a distortion of reality, obviously. And I actually didn't want to go overboard with the hipstematic. But I agree with you, it's more about color. And I think maybe that's because maybe that's just what I'm more attracted to now than I was then. I can't really explain that. But, with film, you're stuck with what they make, basically.
And now you were offered many more choices.
And I think that can be a good thing and a bad thing. And like I was saying before, by having a fixed lens that was slow, it offered me limitations that I think made the pictures more interesting for me to make.
Limitations in one regard, but more options in terms.
But I actually limited them even more by picking a film and a lens, and then in black and white picking one film and one lens and just sticking to it. And I think it's because of reading Damon Winter's essay, I realized that if I was going to make a body of work, it was going to be consistent. And this is before I ever had an idea of making a book called The Phone Book. So. I think we've covered some good technical ground, but I'm curious about the subject matter. The subject matter of your photography in both books and the trajectory that carries through them. I'm wondering, do you want to say anything about that, or? Well, my general thing that I say about my work is I always try to see kind of the beauty and the transcendence in an everyday, mundane situation. And I think that's a really way of celebrating being alive. It's like saying every moment has possibilities. And maybe that's a little bit Pollyanna-ish, and I know that's a really tough world out there, believe me. And I'm not negating that. But I do think that being in the moment and paying attention, there's plenty of powerful things in front of us if we see them.
I kind of thought of the pictures and the kind of narrative arc of the New Yorkers as kind of as you're being a young man relating to life in New York City. And I see, and having looked at this newer book, I see it personally as kind of tell me if I'm wrong. I see it as like you being comfortable with yourself, and it's a reflection of you're experiencing the world in a much more comfortable way.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. You change a lot in 30 years. When I was making the New Yorkers in the early 80s, I was having a really hard time, and photography was like my therapy. Right. And
I see a tension in that. Like it's underlying, but I see a certain tension in that work. Whereas the phone book, it seems much more relaxed. And
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing. I think it's particularly for the color palette, the subject matter. I think it's just a different kind of challenge.
I think the thing that's really true is the technology you're using for any body of work influences the pictures themselves. And just making squares changes things. Using an iPhone changes things. And one of the reasons why every few years I start to use something else is because I'm getting stuck. And the iPhone was a way to get unstuck. And honestly, at the time, it was counterintuitive to start making pictures with the iPhone because there was so much negativity about that. But honestly, the only thing that made me feel happy about making pictures was the iPhone. And I would bring DSLRs and point-and-shoot cameras with me wherever I went. And the more I made pictures with the iPhone, the more I kept doing it.
Well, actually, that's worth pointing out too. I think is that the phone book is it's not really a diary, but in a sense it's a diary of the places you've been over the last 5 or so. Well, during that time frame.
Yeah.
And some of those are really beautiful spots, so it's bound to have a different kind of attitude in the images.
I think in a way it's a challenge to go to a place like a beautiful beach and try to make a photo that doesn't feel like a cliche. That's kind of a challenge in itself. And I wasn't just trying to make pictures that weren't something. I was trying to make some pictures that were something. And so, I was really conscious of the fact that a lot of the places I were totally lent themselves to the making postcards. And I was trying to counterbalance that somehow with my experience of making photos in general. If you make pictures like you do, there's a photographer that's always brought up named Cartier-Bresson and the decisive moment. And I actually, again, you can disagree with me, but I think of your pictures as not decisive moments. I think of them as part of the continuum. I kind of think of your pictures as more cinematic, more like film stills, kind of like moments. They are particularly some of them are like maybe the moment, but I tend to think of them as considered moments, but not necessarily decisive moments. I can see, like, for instance, I think it's the first picture in the book is a woman standing on the subway platform. Yep.
And I mean, I bet you probably could have taken a couple other pictures, and you probably did, and that probably was the best one.
Yep.
But I could also see that as, you could probably film that, and there probably would have been 3 minutes of
just
kind of loveliness,
exactly.
And so I just wanted to say that to you. I just thought that certainly you chose the best of the bunch, but I can feel like the moments before and
Absolutely.
after
I think that's
some
great.
of your pictures.
I'm glad you can feel the moments before, because photos are just a sort of suggestion that is a trigger for the viewer's imagination. And if I can just get to that point where people start to get involved with the image and let it take them wherever it takes them, that's great. I mean, the decisive moment is a fabulous thing, and I think some of the pictures really work that way, where the juxtaposition of 2, 3, 4, 5 things just comes together like magic.
Right.
And I really respect that kind of work, and I whenever I get a photo like that, I'm really happy.
Yeah.
But there's lots of other photos, like it's like in jazz, there's behind the beat, after the beat.
Right.
And all of them are valid. It just matters about where I'm at in my life now, what I think is interesting. And I never forget to emphasize how important editing is to a body of work.
Well, let's talk about that a bit. I mean, I remember when you were editing the New Yorkers, we looked at, and I'm sure you showed me only a sliver of what, I know that you showed me a lot more than what was in the book, but I'm sure that was just a sliver of what you had. And I'm curious about how the phone book came together, and over 5 years, I imagine you had quite a bit of work. And
it's always the same process. You shoot a lot, you wait maybe a couple of months before you really seriously look at it, because it's too fresh. And once it gets you have some distance and you start to look at stuff, somehow some images start to pop out. And And then, of course, when you decide that you're going to make a body of work like a book, then you go over everything again. And I can't tell you how many times I went through almost every picture I made and just said, gave it one more audience. And that was the same way I worked with the New Yorkers, except it was transparency, slides, and slide sheets. And it was about the same amount of images, 25,000, which is a lot of pictures to go through. And I was doing some research, and I found that when Robert Frank shot The Americans in 3 years, he shot 25,000 and edited it down to 88. So my feeling is that being a photographer is not just making pictures, it's being a really good editor. Because I think a body of work is the art form in photography, not just one great photo once in a while.
I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit more about in-camera editing. I mean, like, that's meaning, did you immediately, like, if you were taking pictures, would you go back like a few minutes later and trash a bunch of pictures?
No, I never throw anything away. It's when I was shooting Kodachrome, I never threw slides away, even if they were out of focus. It was the first shot of the roll, and half of it was burnt out. And the reason why, I just had a feeling that I wasn't really seeing everything that I did. And the proof was 30 years later, when I made the New Yorkers, I found pictures that I didn't even know I took that are in the book. And I felt like the same thing's going to happen when I make the iPhone book, before I even had an idea for a book, is that what you think in the moment and what you think 6 months later looking back at the same work can really change.
Oh, sure.
And, so you have to buy an extra hard drive once in a while, it's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
Or you have to download all the pictures from the phone and start all over.
Right, yeah, you get a new
I don't know, maybe I'm a pack rat, I don't know.
Yeah.
But in the end, I think it makes me feel better to know that I'm not making snap decisions and deleting stuff that has potential later,
Yeah, and in the end, it becomes almost like an old contact sheet.
Exactly.
As opposed to...
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like we were talking about photographing bands. What if I didn't like the band and I threw the contact sheet away and it turned out they were Joy Division 25 years later? It'd be like ridiculous to throw that stuff away.
Right, yeah.
And obviously storing digital is a lot easier in some ways.
In some ways.
Yeah. In some ways. A negative good thing is that it exists in physicality and
the film and the contact sheets. Yeah.
Exactly. And with digital, there's always this danger lurking somewhere.
Right.
About crashes.
Am I going to be able to find it as it backed up? The disc stop spinning, whatever. Yeah.
So you get fanatical about copying everything 3 times.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess the good thing with phone pictures is they're not huge files.
Well, that's the interesting thing. When I first started shooting, the iPhone 4S made about somewhere between 6 and 8 megabyte JPEG, which is ridiculous in a way compared to what DSLRs are capable of. And I was really making a big decision around 2011. I said, am I really going to keep doing this? Can I print from it? And I was able to make prints that were 15 by 15 inches, and then I made a print that was 30 by 30, and it really looked really good. And I said, well, I can keep doing this. Maybe, if I can make prints from it, maybe I can feel like, there's future for these images.
Okay. I'm not a really techie person, so I'm going to ask maybe a silly question, but I know, like, a lot of iPhone pictures that you would take, you couldn't print at 30 by 30. So is there like a certain kind of picture that you can actually
I would say
do that?
the easy ones to print are the ones...
Sorry, that was for myself.
No, I'm saying the easy ones to print that really work are the ones that are shot in bright daylight.
Okay.
Because
they tend to get more detailed information.
Yeah, and you're shooting with JPEG. A JPEG in itself is a limited file. It has the highlights and the shadows are compressed, and that's what JPEGs are all about. So it's another limitation. It's not a raw file, And, that's just the deal. It's like when people were making bodies of work with Polaroid SX70 in the 70s, they knew that the color palette, and the contrast was really limited. And it took a while for Polaroids to be considered something more than just snapshot making stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even Kodachrome, like the slides could be really great, but then to transfer them to a print could be a real
I mean, that was the really hard thing, was to make the Kodachrome slides scan correctly and then make them print right on the paper in the book.
Yeah, I've been told, not to get too techy, but I've been told that Kodachrome's scanners tend to agree with Kodachrome because there's something about the grain or something.
It's not the grain, it's a green magenta shift compared to Ektachrome. But if you use either an Imicon or a drum scanner and the person operating it knows what they're doing, and they can see the original, so they know what they're looking for. I mean, that's one of the great things about film, is that the original physically exists as a transparency, not a color negative. So you're not waiting for the guy at the photo lab to make a 4x6 print or a contact sheet with his interpretation of what he thinks you saw.
Yeah, you can.
And the slide is pretty good in terms of, as long as it's fresh, you know.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to some content, image content.
Okay.
So we see some New Yorker pictures here, and so that was, we mentioned this a little bit. That was all New York, and the new work is
everywhere else.
New York and everywhere. So I'm wondering if you would say something about, if you would go into a little bit more about maybe what your life was and what you were trying to do with your photography then and now, like maybe a more bigger picture kind of.
Well, to me, photography's always been a little bit self-reflexive, in the sense that it's my way of showing myself how clearly I'm thinking and how open I am to the environment. When I was doing the New Yorkers, I think I felt a lot more vulnerable, but in certain ways I was even more open than I am now. And I identified with the people in the photos, like the woman on the subway platform feeling very alone at the end of a day. That could have been me. And then when I'm shooting with the iPhone, the thing with the iPhone, I felt almost invisible with it, because nobody takes it seriously. It looks like you're reading your email. And you could really just feel, it made me feel open to what I was making pictures. I was actually less self-conscious making pictures with the iPhone than I've ever been with any other camera. And I think that really makes a difference. It's not, people say when you make a portrait, you got to have the subject let you in before it starts to work. And I think it's actually the opposite, is when you let the subject into you and they touch your vulnerability, that's when you start to make a good photo. And I would say that's true about the environment also.
So how often would people, how regularly would people know you were photographing them with the iPhone?
I only got beat up about 15 times. I'm just kidding.
Are you Bruce Gilden?
Yeah, that's why. Actually, they would know sometimes, and sometimes they wouldn't know. I think it's really rare for people to say something. Sometimes when they know, they're not happy, but they're not going to say anything. It's very rare where somebody does both. They notice and get upset. And I actually have a lot of respect just for the people and the environment. I feel like I'm a guest shooting in the world.
Well, that's what I was going to say too, since this work is more international than ever, I'm curious about the differences in making pictures in different places.
Well, I think being the tourist, so to speak, I mean, I would actually dress like a tourist, so I'd look even more idiotic than normal. And people would just write me off as just another stupid American tourist in a foreign country, which is actually a good thing. I think for a photographer, being a little bit underestimated by the people around you is actually a really good thing. And, I mean, the iPhone really nobody takes it seriously until the last couple of years. So I felt like I was completely invisible. And that's a great thing. you know? Because that's always been my aesthetic anyway, is not to influence the photograph. It's just kind of witness it and move around the environment and find something that I think speaks to me. It's almost like I walk around, be bored all the time, and when I'm not, and I'm surprised, that's what makes a great photo, is the me being surprised, and hopefully if I'm surprised, somebody sees the photo, be surprised.
Previously, before making this work, when you were using a traditional camera, did you carry a camera around with you everywhere? Were you one of those guys?
One of those guys. I didn't carry it every day.
I'm just wondering if you
it was more about, I'm going to go shoot today.
I was wondering if you noticed the difference between having it always in your pocket as opposed to...
I think it's amazing to be able to have an iPhone that you consider a real technology and tool for making good work. And you're running errands in New York, you know, you have to go to the dry cleaners, you have to go to the therapist, whatever. And on the way, you see a good photo, you have a camera that you have some respect for in your pocket. And it's not like remembering to bring a camera. You have your camera. And I think half the pictures in the book are just me running errands around the city and saying, I feel like taking an hour off to shoot, or I get off the subway and I see something really powerful. And to me, it feels really natural that way.
I mean, they feel like moments, you know, the pictures.
And it may be a diary, but I don't think the pictures are that mundane that they're just a diary. Even though it does have a GPS and a time.
I was going to ask you about that. It's like, why did you decide to include that?
I guess because, you know, this is the first time in the history of the world that an image records that in the metadata. And I just thought it would be interesting for people to, if they're in the mood, to copy the GPS into Google, and you can actually see exactly where I was when I made the photo, and it's a way of just learning about how amazing the world is, you know.
So in 100 years they can do a rephotographic project.
If that's what they want to do, we'll get a Google View car to drive around, you know, with a hovercraft or whatever it is. Bruce Willis will show up.
So are you continuing to shoot with the iPhone? Are you using, you know, a traditional, I guess probably digital SLR at this point?
I have a digital. I got a Fuji X10 like about 6 months ago, which is actually a really great camera. And you know, honestly, I haven't really seriously started thinking about anything new yet.
Well,
I'm just once in a while I get in the mood to make pictures with the Fuji. I'm still making pictures with the iPhone, and now the 6S has a 12 megapixel file, which is actually as big as a lot of point and shoots used to have. So that's pretty good. You know.
So you're just kind of using. You're making the kind of pictures you make with different various tools at this point. And
but what's interesting is I got the 6S Plus, which is a really big phone, and it changes the way I shoot. I'm not as comfortable.
From a 4S. That's really funny.
It feels like it's a little too big.
You almost maybe feel like a movie director or something.
It feels like I'm a little self-conscious because the phone is so big. And you know, the other day I was thinking, you know what, I'm going to buy like the tiniest, like a 16
You're going to go back to a flip phone,
6S, just so I can have a small one just for shooting. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. And then I checked out the price. I said, no fucking way.
They're like vintage and collectible or something, probably.
I mean, I have a 4S at home, a 5S, but now I want the 12 megapixel file, because if you can make a bigger picture, why not?
It's pretty funny.
But I miss the little size. I really do. It's a whole different deal. It's like, you know, I mean, if you have any idea of what it's like to type on the bigger phone now, it's like, it's really maddening a little bit, you know. So I think it does, the technology when it comes to the physicality of shooting changes with what actual apparatus.
There's actually this very rapid evolution that's taking place. Okay, well, I think we're gonna
Yeah? Okay.
open it up for questions at this point. If anyone,
The microphone and try not to have that happen once again. Are there any questions? Just hang tight.
Thank you. Hi, Robert. Do you still shoot on film at all, or if not, do you ever think you'll go back to shooting on film, or is that totally behind you?
No, I mean, I have all the film cameras I ever used sitting in a little cabinet in my house, and once in a while I actually take them out. I had a Bronica 2 1/4 that I still have, and I was shooting still lifes, and I realized that the resolution of film is actually better than the best digital camera. So I shot some color negative of this still life I was working on. And, you know, it was great to wait 3 days or 2 days to get the film back and look at it and realize how great it would be to blow this up to like 40 by 60. And the feel of the color is a little bit different, obviously, than digital. Digital is a little cold, and film is a little warm. So, you know, it's like, I'm really glad I have those film cameras in the house. It just depends on the project. And honestly, I would be heartbroken if I had to sell them. Not that anybody would pay any money for them now anyway, but they are beautiful, you know. And I have a Nikon FM2 that I shot most of the New Yorkers on that I've had for 30 years. And still, it's my favorite camera in the world, so, yeah.
Any other questions? I'll come around. Start with you.
Hi, I have a question about your editing process. Like with the New Yorkers, at some point you must have made prints to sequence and play around with before you put it together. And I'm wondering, at what number did you start making prints for the New Yorkers compared to how many prints? I mean, where you started making prints for this book, was it like?
Well, you know what happens is when I made the pictures back in the 80s, you know, once in a while I'd have an image that I really thought was a strong image, I'd make a print. But in editing a book, it wasn't about making prints, except before I actually decided to make a book. Like, I'd make a box of prints to show somebody like Sean at a portfolio review.
I assume you would probably scan them so you could even make like any kind of reference print, so you could move them around.
Yeah, I would scan them at home on a Nikon scanner and make prints. And the magic of this is actually, I would show the prints in a box, and then the next year I showed people a book dummy that I made on something like Blurb. And just the physicality of a book changes the way people see the images. That's when people started to get interested in what I was doing. It's just the power of books in general, you know, and so the editing process doesn't really have that much to do with printing. It really has to do with how do pictures work on the page, the left page and the right page? How do they talk to each other? How does the whole book as a narrative arc
Did you edit the phone book on the computer?
Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't even, did you even make?
Yeah, I made about
You made some
7
little
or 8
reference
book
prints?
dummies.
But did you make little reference prints and push them around?
Yeah, I tried that once, but it didn't work.
So you were able to just do it on the computer?
Well, Adobe Lightroom has a way of using it so that you can actually move the sequencing of the book around, and then it has a book module. And I made, actually, just like with the New Yorkers, like 10 or 11 dummy books. It's really important to see it physically, because the mistakes really pop. And I'm kind of relentless about that. You know, I might have a really messy apartment, but when it comes to my book, I'm really like super Virgo about it and just nitpick it to death until I'm happy. So maybe 30 edits, 30 versions before I'm even close to being happy. And the designer of both books had their own ideas, and I was really open to what they were thinking. And, you know, my way of editing a book is you find 2 pictures that work as a left and right page that are really amazing, and then you try to do that 100 times. And of course you never get there, but it's a nice bar on the horizon to shoot for. And then you take those pairs and sequence them. So it's my way of structuring my thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. One you may have answered. When you're out on the street shooting, do you find you take one shot and move on, or explore it from different
question.
angles? And
It depends. Sometimes you just get it on the first one. And sometimes when you take the first one, whatever it was you were trying to get is over. I mean, sometimes whatever you're making a picture of is completely static. And then you can take 15 pictures and explore it. But, you know, it really varies from shot to shot. But I'd say, you know, one of the things that makes a good photo for me is if somebody's walking down the street, there's only one part of that frame where the composition makes sense. And maybe you're shooting the second before and the second after, but sometimes you just get it right.
But how do you know if you haven't explored other perspectives on it?
I don't understand what I don't know. I mean, if I see the picture afterwards and it works, I know.
Okay, so I guess another method is curiosity about other potential, you know, points
Angles?
of view. Yeah, I'm just thinking they're photographers.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, you know, let's say I'm standing on the street somewhere and I make a strong picture. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to make more pictures on that corner in that light, but it's just impossible. In a way, that's the one thing I love about street photography is every good picture is an anomaly. If it isn't an anomaly, it's not interesting. It could never happen again, you know? And that's what makes it so brutal and so hard and so interesting, because you're really trying to catch lightning in a bottle, you know? And most of the time I fail. You know, it's like Babe Ruth, he strikes out more than he hits home runs, but once in a while you get one. And I know that's kind of superficial way of looking at it, but it's very rare that you have the luxury to, where everything is just waiting there for you to move around it and photograph it from 50 different angles and then go home and pick it, you know? I wish I could do that sometimes, but am I even getting close to what you're talking about?
That's your answer. Everyone's got a different, you know, there are different.
What would you say?
I would definitely be going around. Because first of all, I wouldn't. There's another. The second half of the question was, do you miss in any way the fact that with film, you couldn't really see the picture for, say, a week?
Yes. Because I think when you make a picture in your imagination, in some ways it's even stronger than it is when you could, even if you know that you can look at the picture 15 seconds after you take it. In a way, that's a good thing, and I think it's a really bad thing, too. There's something magical about waiting a week to get your film back from the lab.
And not knowing what the picture looks like.
Exactly. So it's really in your head. You know, you have to have a sort of experience and
then you eventually say, oh, I got it, or, oh, that
Yeah,
wasn't
I
quite
mean-
what I was thinking.
I mean, it's like a big
Alright,
difference
so-
between shooting street photography and being a commercial photographer. Those guys would shoot Kodachrome, and they would have a lab brush process it in 2 hours and show it, see it by the end of the day, so the client would be happy. But Kodachrome, even at the end of the line when they stopped doing it in 2005, it had to go somewhere. It had to go out of town. It had to be processed and sent back. And it went by US mail, you know? So you had 4 days, and in those 4 days, you know, you were kind of, I can't wait to get this back. It's like candy coming in the mail. And because you know that it's going to take a long time, you really use a different part of your brain when you make the pictures. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Well, it's obviously different if you see, like you say, you know you got it, and then partly you know you got it because you saw it and you like it, but the other, we didn't.
Well,
have
that's
that
not exactly
opportunity.
true. I remember making a picture that's in the New Yorkers, and it was just one of those things where I just felt like, I got to go shoot pictures. I'll be right back. It made no sense. I just went out and did it. I went out for 10 minutes and came home, and I said, I really got an amazing picture here. And I waited 4 days, and there it was. And that doesn't happen very often, but sometimes you just know what you know.
I just want to know your method. I'm not, you know.
I know. It's okay. I'm not getting defensive, I hope. Yeah.
Time for at least one more.
Yeah.
You mentioned you used a book designer on both of your books, but obviously you took it pretty far along. You said you made up to 11 dummies, so you spent a lot of time thinking about that.
The New Yorkers, I made all the dummies before I found a designer.
Right.
And that was Patty Fabricant. And then Patty really took what I had that was really rough and made it into something that had a beautiful formality and elegance to it that I could never come up with in a million years. And she also understood the period of the pictures and found fonts that echoed that. Now with the phone book, pretty early, the way I found the designer for that was I had a dinner with a couple of friends of mine, and we went out to have a cigarette, and I said, I have this idea for making a book called The Phone Book. And he said, well, I'll do it on spec for you. And he took it back to England, and he started working on it. And his design was just so great. And that was pretty early on in the process. And, I have to give him a lot of credit for why this works. Because it's a very specific idea to make a book that's only 7 by 7 inches. It was his idea to put the GPS in the book, and I was like against it at the beginning, and then I kind of came around to it. And you see, I always say that a book is a really different thing than prints. A book has its own specific rules and expectations, and some images are wonderful as prints and they don't work in a book, and the reverse is true. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Terrific. If there aren't any other questions, I think we're going to start the signing portion of the evening. Last chance. Burning questions? No. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. If you haven't had the chance to purchase, they're available back here.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you both.